you've got to hold on to your chair because that's where you really are. Now, you never think about those kind of things, do you? Very seldom. But what you're doing is traveling, Earth's rotating. You're traveling at 1,000 miles an hour right now, rotating on the Earth. You're going around the sun annually, 66,000 miles an hour. You're part of the solar system. You go around the sun. The sun is part of this Milky Way galaxy here. Amazing, isn't it? Way out there on that,
Yep.
That's going at 500,000 miles an hour. It's rotating. And then all of space and time is expanding at 150,000 miles an hour. So you better hold on.
We are so glad that you slowed down to come to this today. Appreciate that. And how many of you have been at a former Socrates event? Okay, looks like 40%, 50%. Great, okay. Well, we appreciate you coming. You could be doing pickleball, you could be on the golf course right now, but instead you chose to come here and think about some deep thoughts about science, about philosophy, about faith, and how these all interrelate. So we really appreciate that you're here. So, yeah, my name is Greg Schrock. You might wonder why I'm here. About 2 years ago, I walked in the door for one of these things, and I've been hooked on it ever since. This is an intense interest of mine. It has been for many years. And I was amazed to find out that there's somebody here in SaddleBrooke who had the same interests as me. So I sort of glommed myself onto this guy. He can't get rid of me. I am an accountant. I am not a scientist. I'm not a philosopher. We're not taking tax questions today. All questions should be directed towards Stu and for the topic at hand. I'm just here to be able to interview Stu. He's the expert in the room, and I've learned so much from him, and I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to be able to do this. So thank you, Stu. We're going to go ahead and get started with kind of a little bit of a background on Socrates. There are quite a few here that have not come before. And so, Stu, could you tell us a little bit about what Socrates is all about and how did this get started?
Sure. Let me just introduce that for this season, there's going to be 6 Socrates forums. This is the first one. And we're addressing this big question, to what or to whom do we owe our existence? I mean, think about that. We didn't choose the time of our birth. We have an expiration date on our badges here, which we don't know. We don't even know why we're here. We're here to discover why we're here, right? So how do we know we exist? To whom or to what do we owe that existence? And we're going to do it in 6 parts. Talk about the universe today. How did the universe come to be? We're going to talk about planet Earth next month. How did planet Earth come to be? Is that the center of the universe, or is that a speck of dust in this whole universe? Then we'll talk about life. How did life originate? I mean, can you imagine a ball of mud? How did we go from a ball of mud to something that moves, that eats and moves and reproduces? And then we look around at the spectacular creation around us. So we look at the stars. Gail and I were at the hot tub the other night, and we're looking up at the stars, and you can't help when you're relaxing. You go, look at that out there. I mean, where is that? How far away is that? How big is that stuff? How did it get there? I mean, those are huge questions. And then we look during the day at the plants and the animals and the how'd they get there? Are they designed? Did they evolve out of mud? Those are big questions. Then human beings, are we just another animal, or are we special somehow? And then in April, by the time we get to April, which will be the 6th one, Greg, we're going to talk about who is God and what are our own personal conclusions. Now, we came to some tentative conclusions last 2 semesters, not semesters, but 2 sessions, and that's how we got interested in going a little bit deeper in this topic.
You bet. Yes. Thank you.
Well, I was going to actually, I didn't really answer your question. What is Socrates? So I'll do that for the lot of first timers here too. But our purpose there, you can read. Our purpose is to explore the big questions of life, and it's not just as a scientist or a theologian or a philosopher. All those disciplines ask the same question. They want to explain reality. Science wants to explain reality, right? It just doesn't want to explain how technology works. It wants to explain what it sees as real. Theology wants to explain, is God real and how do we get here? And philosophy is just acquiring wisdom. I mean, we're all philosophers. We all take in information. We evaluate evidence. We make our decisions based on evidence. Most of us do anyway. We don't take steps of blind faith. Unless we're watching television and get sucked in one of those ads, then it's just blind faith. But so we think that the core of a good evaluation or a good explanation is, what's the evidence say? And evidence is never one hand clapping. Evidence is another hand clapping. So there's opposing views. There's views and opposing views. And there's evidence that you can weigh. And we spend a lot of time saying, well, what this says, what that says, what direction does this point, what direction does that point, and what do you think? So we try to stay away from authority, except we want to hear what the authorities have to say that contribute to why they believe what they believe.
Of course. Yes. And I know that I've learned a lot from you, and there's a particular painting in Rome that is important to Socrates. I think you've got a slide of this. You want to explain what that means?
Anybody recalls seeing this in the Vatican, this particular painting? This is the, oh yes, we got a couple. This is the School of Athens. This was painted back in 16th century. And what it depicts is the philosophers of Western civilization. Socrates was the father of modern philosophy. Mm-hmm. His two prime students were Plato and Aristotle. And most of the things that we know about philosophy are based on methodologies that they set, and they know how to ask questions. Socrates said he didn't know anything. He said, the only thing I know for sure is I didn't know anything. So what he went around town doing was he asked questions. What a great way of learning, right? Instead of we want to ask questions and learn. He learned how to do it. So we do a lot of that in Socrates. And this is a picture here. This fresco is a picture of the two main characters in the middle there are Plato and Aristotle having quite a debate between themselves. One's pointing like this. That's Aristotle with his fingers pointing down. And Plato is there with his hand up, pointing straight up. This really represents how we acquire knowledge. We either top down or bottom up. Aristotle was very, very particular about trying to understand. He almost like the first scientist, where Plato was the first philosopher, I'll say. Aristotle was the first scientist. But he wanted to know, what he's pointing at with his fingers is he wants to know the particulars, the details of this. He would ask questions about this, and then he'd classify it, and which was one of the bases of our modern scientific method. But Plato's talking about, there has to be a beginning. There has to be first principles. If there's not first principles, we wouldn't be here, right? These things down here wouldn't be there. So he asked different questions than Aristotle, but the two of them together asked these four questions. And this is how the Greek philosophers thought they knew anything. They thought they knew anything if they had answers to those four questions. Those four questions are, what is its design? And Plato called it form. He thought that there was an original form somewhere. What's its purpose? Why is it even there? And Aristotle would say, well, what's it made of? He'd be taking it apart and reducing it down to its individual components. And then how is it put together? So if he knew how it was put together and what it was, he thought he knew a lot of the answers about the particulars. But he didn't know by assembling what the first principles were. So those four together were really, really cool. And then something happened during a period called the Enlightenment. We got very smart about 300 years ago. We thought that, those theologians were in charge, the people making ideas about design and purpose and so forth, and we can figure all this out on our own. That's basically what the Enlightenment period was. I mean, they all acknowledge that somebody or something had to start all this off, but so they eliminated Plato's view of things, basically, and concentrated on what's it made of and how is it put together. And we call that today scientific materialism. And mostly science is done in this way, scientific materialism, which means that, how many of you know who Carl Sagan is? Have you ever seen Carl Sagan? Oh, good, yes. So, if you remember his Cosmos series, and it's been continued for the last 30 years, Neil deGrasse Tyson did the latest rendition of it. But Carl will be there. The universe, the cosmos, he called it, is all there is, all there ever was, all there ever will be. That's materialism. That means that the cosmos, which is material things, is all there is. It almost sounds religious, doesn't it? And it is religious in that respect. Is there anything that's immaterial as part of the cosmos? You bet. I mean, you're sitting here. You have free will. You have consciousness. There's all kinds of things that can't be explained by material processes.
Absolutely.
Know that. So we like to ask all four questions when we do Socrates.
Good. Yeah, and just to make sure I'm getting this, those four questions are usually not answered by science, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's
just
correct.
a couple of them. What are things made of, and how do they work? But as far as what the purpose of it is or how it was designed, that kind of thing, those are the things that science, you have to go beyond scientific materialism to be able to answer those questions.
And that's what's exciting about what we're doing, because
Yeah.
not are we asking that, we're asking that because what we're going to find out in the last 50 years, science is discovering that they need to know that too.
That's right. Yep. Well, good. And I was gonna have you briefly go over the sessions from last year. I think we should move on because of the time constraints. We want to get to the main
Okay.
question today.
Okay.
But many times, and you all need to go to the website that the Socrates at SaddleBrooke website. It's a wonderful website. There's something like 20-some lectures that are up there, and all of this is more in depth.
Yes.
But one thing that I got from that was that you kept saying over and over that something called intelligent design should have a place at the table of ideas for us to be able to examine the evidence and see which hypothesis is the best. You've said that many times in season 1 and season 2. Can you expound a little bit on that?
Okay. Yeah, what I'll do is these 7 sections here that we did the first 2 seasons, each one of them we examined the materialistic scientific point of view. We also asked the deeper question is, does it have a design and purpose? And in session 2, we talked about design and purpose of the Earth, which is going to be very exciting next time, because we're going to talk about what's called the anthropic principle that science discovered in the 1970s, that everything is perfectly fine-tuned to even have a planet Earth. And then the origin of life, how did that come together? That wasn't just thrown together by mud molecules. There had to be design and purpose in that. And then the origin of the species, how did new information come in to make the next species? And then what is being human, knowing about free will. So each one of these sessions we found out that we needed an input of some kind of intelligence. And that's what I mean by intelligent design.
That's the definition of intelligent design. Okay.
Yeah, some things, and here's how it basically goes, is some things, not all things, because we don't need to know intelligent design of the computer. We have our own intelligence for that. But there's something special from the outside that's required. When we talk about intelligent design, we say some things in nature can be best explained by the input of intelligence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. And your contention is that that should at least be part of on the table of ideas so that we can bounce off evidences that we see of each other and see which thing actually describes reality the best.
But that's really a good point, Greg. Science, philosophy, theology, they all want to describe reality. And we don't want to keep stuff off the table that has the potential for explanation. Sure, we don't want to put Santa Claus on the table as a creator, right? I mean, but we can. There's nothing wrong with making a Santa Claus hypothesis. The thing is, it will disappear on the first test, right?
You got to have evidence for Santa Claus.
You got to have evidence for it, right?
There is none, yes. Don't ask my daughter. She would say differently, but yes, you're right. There is no evidence.
So you can put hypotheses on the table. That's how science in its purest form really works. Give me any hypothesis, but why do you believe that? Show me some evidence. And then it's more than just evidence of my opinion. It's evidence that can be tested. I mean, science tests things. And it's just not my test, it's your test and your test and your test, and they're consistent, right? So observations are consistent. And then over time, that testing. So that's what I mean by pure science that way, yes.
That makes sense. Great. I thought we could also have a little bit about your story. What got you interested in this? You talked about the big questions of life, and at some point in your lifetime, those were niggling at you. Why don't you give us a couple minutes of your story?
Okay. Before, can I just do the 4 takeaways that I see that we accomplished in the first 2 seasons? Because these 4 takeaways were, most of us do things like what I'm doing because we're personally interested in the topic, right? I mean, we're not making big money doing this, so we're personally interested. And the first 2 seasons of Socrates, I would say these were the 4 takeaways that came that I was really excited about, and that was that science and faith are really complementary. They're not antagonistic. And if you look at the arguments in the papers and the media and so forth, they're always painted as kind of antagonistic. So they're not antagonistic. Scientific materialism is a philosophy, not science. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're just keeping your science to scientific materialism, if you're just doing experiments and doing the hard things of the visible things, and when somebody proposes a design argument, for example, or a purpose, what's the purpose of the eye? That's a scientific question. There's nothing wrong with it. But if it's arbitrarily kept off the table, that's not good science. Scientific materialism is the philosophy, an ideology. It's not a scientific conclusion. Design and purpose is the 3rd takeaway I got from it. Can I read this here? Yes. They're back on the table of science. And we'll get into that in our discussion today. What do I mean by back on the table? It's a legitimate thing to investigate from a scientific standpoint. And then evidence should be followed wherever the path may lead. This was huge to the Greeks. I mean, why do you believe what you believe? Is it just your opinion, or why do you believe it? So you build your case based on evidence, and you follow the evidence. Does it go this way or that way? And that's what I really got excited about.
Good.
So, but I can give, when I give my little story on this.
I'd love for you to share a little bit about where you came from on this.
Well, I was very interested in science from about that high. I mean, it was really a great time to be interested in science too, because we had the telescope. We had Mount Palomar telescope in California. And look through the telescope, go down to the Fels Planetarium and see the stars. And had a telescope and asked all kinds of questions. I remember my dad taking a grapefruit. Well, that's the sun, right? And then the orange was the Earth going around the sun. Then the lemon was the moon going around the. So those. And
you needed 3 or 4 arms to be able to do that, but that's okay.
And I love that kind of thing. And I grew up with that, and then getting to deciding what I wanted to do in college. Physics was probably the closest thing that was the most general scientific category. If you learn physics, you learn what the structure of matter is and this kind of thing. And then I went on to graduate school in systems engineering and operations research. But what really got me was when I started reading philosophical books by the scientists, by Albert Einstein, for example. I just loved, he said, God does not play dice with the world. Well, what did he mean by that? And quantum mechanics said you have to have an observer there before you have anything that you, I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, these are immaterial things that are coming into it. Well, that fascinated me, so I read all kinds of philosophy at that time. But I had a niggling that I wasn't getting answers when I was in school. We had, anybody took science, you probably remember the very fundamental laws of physics are called the first and second law of thermodynamics. And it sounds very esoteric, but it really isn't. I mean, the first law just says matter and energy can't be created nor destroyed. Well, it can't be created and destroyed, but I'm here. Where did it come from? So it was the very first question. And you can't raise your hand and ask that question. They say, well, they discussed that over at the other school somewhere. You know, that's not part of the final examination, so don't worry about it. And then the second law said about the end of the universe. It just said that the universe was going to come to an end. And I said, boy, do I have to worry about it? I was one of these people that counted the days until the year 2000. I remember being in 5th grade and actually calculating the number of days till year 2000 because I never thought I'd make it. I mean, how could I possibly get to year 2000? And so I had this philosophical nudging too. But all these great philosophical thoughts went away when I went to college, married my childhood sweetheart, had 2 kids, wanted to make a ton of money and fame and fortune and status and leadership, and started a software company. And by the way, I was in software. This is way before Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. When I said I was in software, they thought I was making sweaters. I was like 10 years too early for the big revolution. But those questions never went away, but they went away temporarily until I got into my 30s. And you know, if you grow up with questions and they're never answered properly, they don't go away. And so in my 30s, I'm really thinking this. Now I have all the things I couldn't want anything more. I lived in this beautiful place and had beautiful family and had great company and everything, but still there was something nudging at me that there has to be more. Any of you remember Peggy Lee? Oh yeah, remember her song, Is That All There Is? That drove me crazy. I mean, she had this sultry voice, and she would go, is that all there is? Is that all there is? And we'll just keep on dancing and break out the booze and have a ball. Yeah, there you go. I saw people, there you know that one. Well, that's great, but how long does that last, right?
Stu, Peggy who? I haven't heard that story.
I was praying for somebody 20 years younger than me. I got one 30 years younger. It's even better. So anyway, I asked those big questions, and one day I was out jogging, and I looked up at the sky, and I said, God, is there really a God? Yeah, there has to be a God. I mean, this stuff didn't get here by itself, but he's way in the background, in the back room somewhere. And I literally poked a hole in the sky, and it wasn't a dare or anything. It was a legitimate question of faith. You know, if you're there on a faith basis, would you communicate with me somehow? And 6 months later, I have over the next 6 months, I have these encounters with God, and I end up going to church and becoming a Christian. And that's a whole story by itself, but asking questions brought me to that position.
And the big questions.
The big questions.
The big questions. And I think that's part of the human experience, right? I don't think any of us in here have never thought about why we're here, the purpose, is there meaning to life, that sort of thing. And yeah, I can totally understand that. That's what got me into interested in this as well. You're like, is this all there is? I guess Peggy Lee sang that, so yes, that's exactly the question I had. Now this has been up on the screen for a while. I think you were going to mention that there was a turn at some point in the 60s of science. where prior to that, when the Enlightenment happened for hundreds of years, there was an assumption that maybe science could explain everything. What changed?
Well, the reason I was looking at this book, when I was rereading Stephen Hawking, you probably all know, he's probably the most famous scientist of our time anyway. Unfortunately, he died in 2018, but he was supposed to die 50 years before from his Lou Gehrig disease. And he wrote a great book back in the 80s that I consumed, and it was A Brief History of Time. It sold like 30 million copies, and it was on the New York Times best-selling list for almost five years. And he had the same kind of questions in that book. It was interesting. He was very open to the God question. At that time, he spent first 20 years of his life proving that the universe had a beginning, which is our subject
Absolutely.
today.
Yeah.
And time had a beginning. He and Roger Penrose actually proved that there was a beginning to the universe, which was a huge change, and I'll get into that in a second. But I do want to, in his book, he was telling this funny story about, it was another astronomer giving a talk like I'm doing today, about the universe and the sun going around this and the moon going around that and so forth. And at the end of it, a little old lady in the background is waving her hand feverishly, and she says, "Rubbish, pure rubbish." So he's thinking, what is he going to do? So he puts on a superior smile afterwards, and he listens. She says, "Young man, don't you know the earth is a flat plate sitting on the back of a tortoise?" So how's he going to answer her without putting her down? He said, "Well, but what's the tortoise standing on?" And she said, "Ah, very clever, young man, very clever. Its tortoise is all the way down." So now, if you really wanted to be a wiseacre, you would say, well, what's the bottom tortoise standing on, right?
There you go.
Everything needs a beginning.
Absolutely.
And in the 1960s, it was pretty much thought that science had this all figured out in almost all the disciplines. I'm not just talking about, we're talking about cosmology here, the beginning of the universe,
Okay.
not cosmetology.
Not okay. Good.
Cosmology, but talking about fossils and paleontology, talking about geology, the study of the earth, talking about all the sciences. Biology, particular, yeah, right. And they thought they had it figured out pretty much. And in 1959, which was the centennial of Darwin's publication of The Origin of Species, here's what Sir Julian Huxley said. He said that the scientific materialism has shown that the heavens and the earth were not created. Reality is a single process of evolution, and there's no longer a need for a creator. Well, and we got it wrapped up. Science buried God, buried religion, buried philosophy, pretty much. And then the evolutionary sciences, which we'll talk about in next year in the forum. Man is the result of purposeless and natural processes, did not have him in mind. So we don't have design and purpose according to science.
According to this, yes.
We just threw it off the table. It's going to stay, and we're going to keep it off the table.
Yes, and this is a famous Time magazine cover, right? And so this is from what year? Was this for the late 50s?
66.
66, okay.
But the late 50s is when this started, and then and 60 is when the triumph came. And then things changed.
Okay, some things changed. So you've talked in previous sessions about the old science, which I assume that's what that is, the old science. And then in 1966 and following, something changed. You call that the new science.
Right.
Yeah. This is a definition of intelligent design. I think you talked about that.
Already talked about that. It's back on the table.
Good.
And I'm going to give you some evidence of why that is.
Okay. Now, we are here for the universe. Right? We're here for thank you for giving a little bit of your story. But today, the main topic is the universe. And I think we all know what we mean by the universe, but do you have a simple definition of the universe?
There's the universe in one slide.
Okay.
All right, we start off with this Earth and the moon and the sun up there, and And you know what the solar system is? Solar system is the sun with the 8 planets that go around it. Earth, number 3. Now, Pluto used to be a planet.
See, I'm old enough to know that, at least. So, yes.
Pluto, but it must have been a bad dog or something because they demoted Pluto as a planet.
That was a sad day.
But the solar system is just one star that has all the planets, and then the one star becomes a star just like the stars we see at night. I mean, that's the Pleiades. You look up at the Pleiades. Well, those are stars. They have solar systems too. We know about 4,000 of them, as a matter of fact. We call them exoplanets, planets that are out there. And we all know about, are we alone? You know, we're all looking for, is there other life? And we'll discuss that in one of the future sessions. In fact, next month, I think we'll even take that on, are we alone? And then those stars are part of a galaxy. There's other galaxies. There's 100 billion of those galaxies out there. And each of those galaxies, and more than that, I mean, we keep on discovering more. There's at least 100 billion. And there's at least 100 billion stars in those galaxies. I mean, this is incredible. And then nebula, there's smudges out there too, which we didn't know until 100 years ago. And those smudges are gas and consolidating particles that are forming other star systems right now. So that's what the current universe is.
Yeah. So essentially everything, right? I mean, everything is in the universe. Everything that we can observe, everything that we can even think about, is in the universe. That's what you're defining it as.
Everything material, as Carl Sagan would say.
Okay.
And then also immaterial.
And I assume it's big. I mean, we all look out there, and what kind of scales are we talking about? I mean, the universe is bigger than we can imagine, I imagine.
Well, yeah, let me give some indication of it. The sun, we see all the time, our star is 93 million miles away. Well, it sounds big, but that's tiny. But it's big enough that it takes 8 minutes for the light from the sun to get to us. 8 minutes. I thought light was instantaneous. No, light's not instantaneous. It has a finite speed. In fact, it's the most maximum speed there is in the universe. It's 186,000 miles a second, 7 times around the Earth, light. And that light traveling at that speed to go for 93 million miles takes 8 minutes. Wow. I mean, the sun might have burned out by now. We don't even know it. We won't know it for 8 minutes.
We won't know it for 8 minutes, yep.
But these other stars out there, they're way out there. I mean, the closest star to us is, well, here's how astronomers measure distances. They measure it in light years. Can you imagine how far light traveling at 186,000 miles a second, how far it would go in a year? And I'll tell you, I've done the math. 6,000 billion miles. 6,000 billion miles. That sounds like the national debt, doesn't it? Holy mackerel. But that's 1 light year. And the closest star to us, other than the sun, is 4 of those light years away. I mean, we're talking about sending missions out. We can't even approximate 186,000 miles a second. We can go maybe 35,000 miles an hour. So this is way out there. So, but that's not even the craziness. Our Milky Way, we said we're there, that's the Milky Way. That's 100,000 light years across. 100,000 light years across. And now that we have measured the universe, we know how far out it is. I'm going to tell you that story in a second, but that goes out for 13 billion light years, the very edge of the universe.
Billion with a B.
B, yes, B.
Wow. Enormous.
Yeah. So measuring the universe in light years is probably the easiest way of understanding, and even that's mind-boggling.
Yep, incredible. So your contention, right? Your contention is that there is a beginning of the universe.
There is a beginning.
You're giving me scales that I can't comprehend. How Okay, talk to me about that. How does that compute?
Okay.
How do we know that?
What this slide is showing is in the background, that's what the Hubble telescope calls the deep field. And the deep field is a space that's a pinpoint in space that was dark. And when they enlarged it after 10 days of photography, they found that each one of those dots of light, instead of being a star, is actually a galaxy. Galaxy. And what I have in the middle of it is what's currently called the Big Bang Theory of how the beginning of it's where we're getting to. The Big Bang Theory, how this universe formed from the very beginning. And the theory, and I'll explain this, is that this Big Bang occurred 13 billion years ago and has been spreading out to the size of the current universe.
And how in the world did we figure this out? If you're talking about such a big thing, how do we know that there's a beginning of the universe?
A great story. This is really fun. And on the website, I really go into it in more detail. But these pictures kind of summarize that back in the 1920s, the largest telescope in the world was Mount Wilson Observatory right above Pasadena. And a lawyer turned astronomer by the name of Edwin Hubble. I know that name's very familiar to everybody. He's there doing his observations, as you can see, and he notices something about all the galaxies. And what does he notice? That it's called the redshift. And what it means is that the universe, all the universe is expanding. And probably the easiest way of explaining this is I have a balloon here, Greg. I'll show you. Here, see my white balloon here?
I sure do. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to stretch it a little bit because it'll be easier to blow up and so forth. And I painted black dots on it too, so you can see what's going to happen when I start blowing up this balloon.
They look a little navy blue to me, but that's okay. Yeah.
So this balloon represents the expanding universe that we're going to see, and you'll see what happens when I blow this up. Okay, it's that big. Now, see what's happened to the dots that represent on the galaxies on there? What do you think's happened to them?
They've moved apart.
They moved apart. It's expanding. So Hubble's in the middle of this, seeing these galaxies expanding, moving all the way out. And we can start measuring that. Before Hubble even saw this, we thought the Milky Way and all the stars that we see out here at SaddleBrooke at night was all there is. We had no idea that this stuff was way, way, way out there until we could have the telescopes and the technology to really view this. So that's one line of evidence that was happening, and no explanation at that time, except the mathematician, philosopher, great cosmologist Albert Einstein gets into the fray and has what he's called the field equations of general relativity. And he has a model of the universe. He comes up with a model of the universe. Now, before Einstein and Hubble, everybody thought, scientists, philosophers, everybody thought that the universe was infinitely big. So the theologians said, well, God created in the beginning, right? The scientists said, well, we have an infinite universe, so it's a standoff. Immanuel Kant made that whole thing possible. He said, well, there's a standoff between the cosmologists and the theologians. So they thought that the universe was just infinitely big and it wasn't expanding, it was static. But these two discoveries put together changed everything in the world of cosmology. Einstein didn't believe it. He put a fudge factor into his equations, as a matter of fact. Even Einstein fudges. Can you believe that? He had something called the cosmological constant, and he put in there that kept his equations in balance so that the universe would be static and infinitely big. But a priest, a Catholic priest by the name of George Lemaitre, who was an observer. It's really interesting that the Vatican actually has observatories. They even have one up here on Mount Lemmon. And they have priests that are trained in the sciences, and Lemaitre was one of these cosmologists, and he works on Einstein's equations, and he finds out that Einstein's equations, if you take away the fudge factor, actually talk to having a beginning of the universe. And here's how. Here's the balloon, right, Greg? So tomorrow, the balloon's going to be that big, right? Next year, it's going to be that big. Well, how about if you run the equations backwards?
Go run time backwards,
Run
right?
time backwards.
Yeah.
How about if you run it back? Well, that means yesterday it was that big, and the year before, 1,000 years before, and you run those equations backwards, and then what happens? All of a sudden, you come back to what they call a singularity. It closes up, and there's a beginning point. That means all the universe that we see, all the physical universe, had to be crunched into this little thing about the size of a dot. I mean, I can't even imagine. We talked about the size of the universe being now it's in the size of a dot. 300 million degree temperature they calculated that it have to be, and something happened at the Big Bang. So now the theologians are happy that, in fact, the Catholic Church even awarded Stephen Hawking a pontifical award for their highest scientific award for showing that this to be true, because the Belgian priest called this the cosmic egg, just like the sperm, the egg, a human being. Well, he saw that as the beginning of the universe, so that in his mind, verified the Bible, the Genesis account, let's put it that way. And all the great religions of the world, especially Western civilization, have a beginning, have a Genesis account. So so it said it was a beginning, but we didn't know until 1990, didn't have the weight of the evidence so strong as it is today. And it wasn't until we could put up the Kobe satellite to find what they call the background radiation. And I go into this on the website a little bit, but just imagine if there was a beginning, there had to be some relic of that beginning heat, that explosion, let's call it an explosion, today. And that heat, they calculated, they predicted it would be 3 degrees above at the absolute zero, and it would be coming from every direction. And in 1965, they discovered it. It was really an interesting story, but we don't have time to get into it, of how this was discovered, and the Nobel Prize winners that discovered this background radiation. But then in 1990 it came together, and now that's what the current theory is, that there's a beginning to the universe. People don't look about infinite universes. Not everybody wants to believe it.
Sure.
But that's how science works, right? We have a theory, and then we have an anti-theory, and they work together.
And I imagine that scientists were very happy with a steady state where it was an eternal universe, and then suddenly scientific discoveries that there was actually a beginning, that this whole thing had a beginning.
Yeah.
And there must be theological or philosophical implications that go beyond science.
Oh, well, that's
fact.
huge. I mean, like the theologians in the Catholic Church in particular were thrilled about the cosmic egg, let's call it. But the cosmologists were the materialists, the atheistic materialists, didn't want to have a beginning because they'd have to explain the beginning. If you have a beginner, what's the implication? There's a beginner, right? You don't have beginnings without beginners.
Something caused it.
So poo-pooed the whole thing. But even Einstein, when he saw the data, he said, no, it has to be true. Looking through the telescope, and I see the redshift, my equations. Lemaitre works out the equations right. That's an interesting story, how they met in Pasadena back in 1930. And he said, he said it was the biggest blunder of his life. Einstein actually said that was the biggest blunder, to put that cosmological constant in there. So he was a beginner, and
he was convinced.
He was convinced, yeah. So now the church was really happy with this, because now they even had the world's most famous scientists on their side.
Admitting that there was a beginning.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, good. You've convinced me that there's evidence for the beginning of the universe, and from the website, I've heard of many other evidences for the beginning of the universe.
Huge, yes.
It's really established at this point. It's not really controversial at this point, that everybody knows that there's a beginning of the universe, right?
There's a beginning. There's still some holes in the theory, but that's how theories work. In fact, even the
Absolutely.
Webb telescope is starting to discover things that happened, should have happened for many years later, but that's how the model keeps on getting tuned.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how science works, right?
That's how science works.
You put a theory on the table and you test it.
Test it.
And then if it passes muster, it moves to the next stage. And
Exactly.
everything else falls away. Well, good. I want to make sure we get time for questions. But Stu, I want you to tie this up for me. You've convinced me that there's a beginning of the universe.
Okay.
The contention today is that that points to some sort of a transcendent creator of some sort.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
Can you connect those dots for me?
I'd love to.
If we agree that there's a beginning of the universe,
Yeah.
why does that then imply a creator?
Okay, well, I did anticipate, because we had talked about, you were going to ask me that, so I wrote these out for you.
Right.
just for you, Greg. Okay, the very first point here is, can you imagine the size of the universe being compressed into a dot that's smaller than an atom, and all the atoms that are in us and everything else is in this. So whatever the beginner is, or whoever the beginner is, has to be all powerful. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Has to be transcendent. What do I mean by that? Well, it has to be beyond the universe, because there was no universe. There was nothing material. Transcendent just means beyond the current universe, beyond Carl Sagan's cosmos, all there is. There has to be something outside it. It has to be immaterial. Well, there was no material. Material is this stuff, but something that, if material doesn't even exist yet, then it's immaterial.
Material is part of the universe.
Material
It didn't exist before the universe.
Didn't
Yeah.
exist.
Okay.
Didn't exist. Has to be uncaused. What do I mean by that? Well, if it was material, then it would have to have a beginning. The bottom tortoise, right? What's the bottom tortoise?
There's got to be a bottom tortoise.
There has to be a bottom somewhere, but it's not material. It has to be immaterial and uncaused. It has to be an uncaused cause, or we don't have a beginning. You ever see one of those domino things that go round and round and round? I love that. And every one of those domino things, you say, well, how did that get started? And if you look at the very first second, there's always a little finger coming over the wall from the outside, right? and pushing it. So there has to be a beginner. Has to be a mind. What do I mean by that? Well, minds can make decisions that material can't make. Materials don't make decisions to do something. There had to be an intent, something with a purpose. What was the purpose of the universe? Well, this beginner had to have a reason. So I've really come to believe in mind over matter. It's not just the matter that's out there. There had to be a mind behind the matter, and that's why I say that. Intelligent design and purpose. Well, the complexity of something like this is just so mind-boggling. It has to be the most intelligent, whatever it is, has to be the most intelligent thing there is. And the explanation for a creator is the simplest explanation there is. Because these 7 points right here, any theologian would say, well, that's our definition of God. That's a simple explanation, because you've defined what it is ahead of time, and you've already made a prediction of what it would find. So complex, there are a whole lot of pushback type of arguments like multiverses and infinite universes and string theory and so forth. These are so way complex and ununderstood, but if you don't want to believe in a beginner, you're going to have to come up with something, right? So there's plenty of those pushback theories too.
Okay, so are you saying then that actually there are materialists out there that make an assumption of materialism?
Oh, absolutely.
Because otherwise, why wouldn't they be convinced of this?
Well, I mean, here's all the pushbacks that I've noted over the years. We begin with other materialists who can't buy even the Big Bang, and they come up with things like, well, there has to be creation of hydrogen gas somewhere in the universe. Well, that's been proven to be incorrect. Stephen Hawking spent the last 30 years of his life trying to show that the universe didn't have a beginning, so it didn't need a beginner. After he spent the first 20 years proving that there was a beginning, that's all right. We can all do what we want. In the middle here, that's my New Scientist magazine. It just came in today. It says Finding the Multiverse. That's the most popular one among the materialists that don't want to buy into a beginner. Multiverse, it means that there's infinite number of universes out there. We just happen to be the cosmic winner right here. We just happen to be the one that where life can be supported.
And I think in the next session, I think we're going to get more into the multiverse.
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely. We're going to get into that.
If that piques your interest, come on back the next time because we'll talk more about that.
Here's my favorite one. Lawrence Krauss, who taught astronomy here at the University of Arizona, and he's on a popular speaker tour, and he's, I would call him an apologist for atheism. He wrote a book for the universe from nothing. Universe from nothing. He was interviewed on a famous, a very popular daytime AM station, and he was asked, well, explain to me how you get something from nothing. I mean, you have multiple PhDs and all this stuff. Explain how that works. And he said, the first thing that Dr. Krauss said, about the universe, he said, it depends on what you mean by nothing. And he said, all right, I just go away. I won't even go there. And then even in the church, there's pushback on the beginning of the universe or the Big Bang theory.
I've heard this. Do you know why there's pushback?
Well, the church is filled with people who don't agree too, just like the cosmology and every other indication. The Catholic Church is very comfortable with it. Some Protestant denominations aren't comfortable with it, and it was primarily because of back when the Reformation happened, and the King James Bible came out at that time. The Archbishop, the Anglican Archbishop of Ireland, Ussher, came out with, and he published the date for the creation of the universe. Now, we had no science that would disagree with it at that point in time. He said the universe was created October 23rd, 4004 BC at 9 a.m. in the morning, 45th meridian. All right, well, there was very little pushback because there was no science to question it. But here's what happened. There's nothing wrong with him having he did a great job on his calculations and everything, but it wasn't based on science. So this gets published in the King James Bible as a footnote, a margin note, basically, alongside. And then the King James Bible becomes the missionary Bible around the world, and people read the footnote like they read the text, and it's an interpretation.
Okay.
Interpretation of what day means, and I won't get, that's a whole thing to get into. I can answer questions for people who are interested in this kind of thing. But the idea is there's pushback in the church, there's pushback from science, there's pushback from materialists.
Okay. But the data, the evidence seems to indicate that there was a Big Bang.
The data is there to, some will say, to the 15th decimal place.
Okay. Amazing. So this is great. It's 5 o'clock, and I would like to get time for some questions. But let me just sum up what I think we've learned today and kind of wrap it all up. So one of the points you made is that meaning and purpose is important and is part of the human experience, and it drives us to ask these big questions.
Exactly.
Materialism has an assumption that there is nothing other than matter, right?
Only thing that matters is matter.
The only thing that matters is matter. I think we would all agree that we should follow the evidence where it leads. You mentioned that early in the talk, and I think we all agree with that we should all examine the evidence and be completely open-minded to where that leads. Whether it leads to a certain religion or to atheism or whatever, we should be open to that. Follow the evidence where it leads. You said that there is considerable evidence for a beginning of the universe, right? And you said that points to an actual creator.
Correct.
And then you gave some reasons why. That a creator, because it created the universe, whatever this is, it had to have been timeless, it had to have been spaceless, it had to have been immaterial, it had to have been very powerful to do so. And I think you actually mentioned that it had to have been personal, a mind. Mm-hmm. Because there's only one thing we know of that can make a decision without being caused to do that, and that is a mind. Mm-hmm. Does that sum up essentially the main points of
I'll change chairs with you. That was perfect.
Okay, great. Excellent. So I think Dick is around here yeah, there he is. And we would love for you all to pose your questions about what you've learned, what we've heard, and see if we can come to any conclusions by the end of the session.
Thank you, Dr. Orr. Thank you, Greg. Here's the question that was you say that evidence points to a creator. If that creator is God, who created God?
That's yours, Stu.
This is one of those great questions. My honey asked me that when we first got married. We've been married 7 years, and she heard me go off on this kind of thing. And she asked me that. My daughter asked me that when she was this high. It's one of the... you saw that God is immaterial, not material. So he doesn't have a expiration date. God doesn't have a beginning date. God is eternal just by definition. The only things that need to be created or are created are material, and they all have end dates and beginning dates. So they need an explanation. But an immaterial God is uncaused. He's the uncaused cause. He's the beginner. And if he didn't exist, or a God, an eternal God didn't exist, or something eternal didn't exist, we wouldn't be here. There'd be no cause for us to be here. So there is no creation of God. God doesn't have to be created. He's uncreated.
And I think I've heard that in a different way, that things are contingent and things are necessary. Contingent things depend on other things to be created, and then there are necessary things, and we can't explain necessary things because they're necessary in existence.
A question in the back? Here, take the microphone.
Back in the early 1950s, there were two biologists, I believe their names were Miller and Urey, who wanted to do away with God, and they wanted to prove that they could throw some chemicals that they thought existed at the beginning of Earth together and create organic cells. And they did. They succeeded in doing that. Would you comment on that, either of you?
Well, yeah, that's a good one, Tom. When we get to the origin of life, I'm going to go into the Miller-Urey experience, but let me clarify. They did not create organic life. What they did is they created some amino acids that are necessary for organic life. And it was thought at that time, and that was another big time front page article, that we're close to the creating life in a test tube. And there has been practically only that much progress at all in even expanding the amino acids that have been were created by the Miller-Urey experience. If we say that life is up here, creating an amino acid is somewhere down on the floor. It's not a big deal at all, and it never really shows that we're close to even understanding what life is. But I'll get into the evidence on both sides of that when we get into the origin of life.
When I was growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, And taking a biology class, I remember seeing the diagram or the picture with these two scientists, and it made an impact on me. And I understand that it's still in our biology books. So young people are still being taught that this is possible.
Yeah, Tom, that really brings up a point that's hard on me, is that our biology textbooks don't take both sides on any of this. And it's not both sides, it's where's the disconfirming evidence as well as the confirming evidence for something like that. The biology textbooks that you're talking about even shows things that we knew were false 100 years ago, but they're never taken out. We can talk about that later too.
You're going to get into the Haeckel embryos?
Yeah, the embryos, right?
Yeah.
Haeckel's embryos, exactly.
Next question or comment. Tom, could you hand the microphone over?
Good afternoon. My name's TJ.
Hi.
I have a question, two questions actually. One's about the four forces that were present at the Big Bang: the weak force, electromagnetic force, gravity, and the strong nuclear force. If any one of these forces had been off by a factor of, I don't know, 0.10, 10 zeros or something, no universe. So it's that precise.
Very, very, very good observation. And next time we're going to actually do that. I'm going to actually show the four forces. I'm even going to show how they're tuned. And like you're saying, if they get off by infinitesimal amount, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, nothing would be here. Yeah. And there's also new evidence that the universe is actually 26.7 billion years old, because there's some things of the early galaxies that are far advanced, and they're too old. They look to be too old for having only be 13.7 billion. So.
Good point. The 13 billion is all we can see at this point in time, but they've been expanding for 13 billion years too. So it goes out farther than that. Is it double or triple the size of it? You're correct on that. But the observable universe is 13 billion years, light years.
Obviously, the jury's still out on that. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other comments?
I have a question here. Thank you for our talk today, or your talk today. I have a question. Could a creator could he have created multi-universes? As they're talking about now, there's the multiverse and that sort of thing. Could a creator created multiple universes, and we're just seeing our universe?
Yeah, very good point. Yes, I mean, obviously, any creator that has those 7 characteristics can do anything he wants, right? Or she wants, I don't know, or it wants. There's no problem with the hypothetical could at all. It's what does the evidence show? And the evidence shows that this is the only universe that we know of. And here's the interesting point about the only universe that we know of. We cannot ever detect if there's other universes, because at the singularity, remember with the singularity comes all the way back to the very beginning, all the laws of physics break down. We can't even go beyond that at all. So anything that's conjectured to be a multiple universe is done strictly on mathematical equations, and do those equations hold? Where's the evidence? You know, science does much better when it's dealing with observational evidence. The equations can predict something, but what can we observe to test that? We can't test multiple universes. To me, a lot of times those are thrown out there as an alternative to the single universe, because people don't want to deal with the beginning. I'd rather have them show evidence against the beginning, and like Fred Hoyle tried to do, than tell me about multiple universes. And we happened, even if there were multiple universes, here's the interesting thing about that. What we'll learn next time is about this fine-tuning the other gentleman brought up, the fine-tuning of the universe. Well, those multiple universes would have to interact with our universe somehow to have a beginning. And if they interact with our universe somehow, that means they have to be tuned somehow. There has to be some connection between the two. So they would have to be fine-tuned also. So even that argument breaks down. It's just like kicking the can down the road without explaining, without an explanation.
Next question, next comment. Well, I have another one that someone handed me. You talked about the textbooks today still having things in it from 50 years ago, even though they've been proven wrong. Why the resistance? Who's doing this resistance of changing the textbooks? Why are they still teaching things that have already been proved wrong?
Well, the simple answer is the assumption of scientific materialism, that material things are all there is, so only the explanation that we're going to teach our kids is scientific materialism. That's a theology. That's an atheistic theology. And because of the separation of church and state, anytime intelligent design is brought up, there's an immediate lawsuit. The last one was in Dover, Pennsylvania. The school board said, our kids ought to learn the disconfirming evidence for what's being taught in our biology classroom. If it's not in the textbooks and we can't teach it, we'll put together a statement of what intelligent design is and put it in the library for your interest so the parents can come and read the statement and you talk about it at home. They got sued over that. And they lost the case because scientific materialism is just assumed to be true, that that's all there is. And whoever 300 years ago, the church was more in control. And the scientists on the outside were railing against what the theology dogma was. Now the scientific materialists are in charge, and they're railing against the theologians or the philosophers. What we need is balanced information. What we need is, what does the evidence show? What direction does it point, that way or that way? I would love to be in a committee that puts together a textbook that gave affirming evidence and disconfirming evidence. But I am part of that committee, Socrates. That's what we do at Socrates.
And that gets to what you were talking about earlier, that you want this to be on the table of ideas. That's what you said.
On the table.
I mean, you can give the evidence for what you're talking about, but you can give the disconfirming evidence also and let people follow the evidence where it leads.
Even Lawrence Krauss is the universe from nothing. I'd love to cross-examine him. But he should have the part at the table, right?
Yeah.
Questions, comments? I've got one that I wrote down listening.
Uh-oh.
And here it is. Okay, Stu, if the universe is so big and apparently so chaotic, with new stars being formed and stars exploding and things running into each other, it's very inefficient. Why does this count against there being a creator and count against there being a God who created it?
Your question reminds me, how many of you saw the movie, I think it was Contact by Carl Sagan? Oh, yeah. I love that movie. I love that kind of thing.
Yep.
They're looking for signals from outer space if we're all alone and so forth. And they start getting signals that follow the prime number sequence that could only come from a mind. It's beyond random possibility. And one of the first questions that was asked was like Dick's question. When they are studying this and they realize the size of the universe and its chaos and the speck that's the Earth in that little corner of the Milky Way, and Carl Sagan told us was a little speck. You ever see those with the explorer that went out 2 or 4 billion years and turned its mirror around and saw the pale blue dot of the little Earth, and they say, how could that little Earth, be there? Isn't God, if God did all this, why all the chaos? Why all the expanse to everything? And the way I look at that, because I'm looking at that there has to be a creator of some type anyway, is that this creator wants to make itself known, himself known for the expanse. How else do you get a sense of infinity? How else, unless you actually see infinity in action, and then as you decide, which we'll see next time, how important that little speck is, that planet Earth, and how finely tuned the dials are. And any dial that would be off, the whole thing would disappear. You say, boy, there has to be not only power and intelligence behind this, but this is my preview of seeing this huge expanse and then realizing that we're here. So maybe man really is very special.
Other comments or questions?
Question. You said everything has a beginning. Do you think God had a beginning?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. That was the first question that Dick asked. Anything that's material has to have a beginning, but something that's immaterial doesn't have to have a beginning, right? Your soul. Do you have if you have a soul, does that have a beginning and an end? We'll talk about that. But if it's immaterial and it's uncaused, it doesn't have to. It's not subject to the laws of physics. It's outside. It's transcendent, right? And if it didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. Does that make sense to you? Sort of, yeah. Well, that's a deep question.
Yeah.
That's what we love about Socrates. We can have dialogues like this back and forth and say, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I was never in materials, but.
We have another question over here.
This is my first meeting, so I don't know. When you were talking about chaos, what came into my mind, or what I thought you were talking about, but one thought I had was, isn't just us calling something chaos sort of very subjective? Like what looks chaos to us could very possibly be not chaos at all. That's what I thought. I just think the term chaos, what seems chaotic to us, very chaotic to us, could very possibly be not chaotic at all to a creator.
Well, no, that's a very good point. How do you determine whether or not it's random and doesn't have any design and purpose, or it's not random and it does have a design and purpose? And that's what science gets into. It tests those kind of things. We're going to show when we get to the human life what a cell is. The cell expanded, thousands of times, it's more complex than a city. It looks chaotic. But you look inside that and you see there's power plants, there's superhighways, there's creation plants, there's raw material, there's garbage disposal. But when you first look at it, you don't know. It just looks like chaos. When Darwin looked at a cell, all he saw was protoplasm. You didn't have electron microscope or anything else. So he bases his theory on, well, that's just a very simple thing, and if I throw enough of them together, it's going to create life. Well, we know that that's not the case when we look inside and see a small city inside a cell, and then there's 100 trillion cells in your body. But that's what science does. It sorts out whether or not it could happen by a random process, which is chaos, or it had to happen by a natural process, the four fundamental forces, or did it happen by an intelligent process? Those are the three ways we create things, right? It either comes out of a mind, or it comes out of a natural process, or it comes out of a chaos. And that's what science does. It sorts those things through. But good point. Uh-oh, here comes a real question. Real hard one.
No.
This one already scares me.
Isn't it the second law of thermodynamics? Things you leave to its own will go to a greater level of disorder. Know what I mean? With other words, if there is no direction to anything, you leave things to their own, then order will go to greater disorder, which we call chaos.
Entropy.
So isn't that the second law of thermodynamics?
Well, second law of thermodynamics says in any closed system, right, there's not going to be anything created in that closed system. It would have to, something would have to come from the outside to create it. And usually when we look at it from the universe standpoint, you say, well, the universe is a closed system, material. So things can't be created or destroyed within that closed system, if that's what you're getting at.
Anybody else?
There's a question back here.
Okay, so you got me all the way back to when we're going backwards with the universe, we sucked back to nothing, and there's nothingness, and the only thing that could create that is a God because of the immaterialism, and then he or she or what is infinite. But then I think about his question.
Hold it closer.
I think about this gentleman's question with the multiverse, and so we're making an assumption that it was a God-type immaterial thing or being or whatever that created the universe, when couldn't it also be a higher and much more intelligent type of being, maybe living in another universe that says, hey, look, I've discovered how to make this, and I'm going to try it over here in this little blank spot, and poof, here we are. So I'm just wondering, I mean, that's kind of where my mind was going with that, so I'd like to hear your response.
Well, there is something called magic, right? we don't need evidence for magic. There are hypotheses like there could be, a super god and a super god, and go ad infinitum. But I'll always get back to the Socrates question. What's the evidence? What's the evidence based on? And there at this point in time, there's that would be just like kicking the can down the road and saying that there's infinite number of causes. We try to go in science and anything to what's the cause? What's the first cause? It's just kind of like the dominoes. As soon as I see the finger going over the wall, I know that's the first cause. I don't have to ask who created the finger, or I don't ask. I stop. Usually in science, when you get to a stopping point, that's where you stop until there's a reason to examine the cause for the cause.
In my very limited knowledge of science, because I did not major in science at all, but I do remember about the hypotheses and things like that. We were also supposed to rule out other possibilities or hypotheses in our experiments. And so when someone brings up something like I did, saying, hey, it could be, it could be this other thing, I'm not sure that it makes it that this is absolutely proof of God. And I'm going to tell you, I'm a spiritual person. I'm very spiritual. But in my mind, in my little limited human mind, I'm not necessarily convinced yet that that is proof of God, if that makes sense.
Oh, I'm with you. There is no proof. There's no proof of God. There's no proof of no God. The best you can do, and if you go to the series that we did on the video, is line up the evidence. Which direction do you think the evidence points? And follow that path. Follow that path and get your questions answered. It's like Reagan said, test but verify. Verify your conclusions. So don't be led down the primrose path by authority either. Come to your own conclusions, and it's great. If I would say anything, encouragement is ask questions. Ask questions, get answers. And we don't know. I hope you don't think I'm trying to prove that there's a God here. I'm not. I'm just showing evidence that points in the direction of a creator.
So I'd like to give a hand to Stu and to Greg. Thank you all for coming.